Welcome to Vintage Variety. Today's content is all about unsigned vintage jewelry, also known by vintage jewelry collectors as Unsigned Beauties. As a collector, we all run across pieces of vintage costume jewelry that are unsigned. Just because a piece isn't signed doesn't mean that it's invaluable. Many unsigned pieces can be attributed to certain manufacturers or designers. A good example of this are some of the early Miriam Haskell pieces. Many of those pieces are quite valuable. Fortunately, there's plenty of information out there on how to identify early Haskell pieces by their construction and the materials that were used. Another good example of pieces that are usually unsigned are pieces by Deliza and Elster, fondly known as Juliana. These pieces usually had a paper tag on them. They did not stamp their jewelry with their name. Just like the Miriam Haskell pieces, their jewelry is relatively easy to learn how to identify based on the materials used and the construction. There's a lot of information on the web and there are some books out there. So these are other examples of unsigned beauties. But what about all those other unsigned beauties floating around out there? How do we go about trying to identify them? To answer that question, I'm going to talk a little bit about the manufacturing of some of those vintage pieces. Many pieces of vintage costume jewelry were produced by manufacturing firms. The pieces would be produced by order with the buyer's name stamped or attached to the piece. Unmarked pieces would often be sold to department stores. The department stores would then package the pieces in their own boxes or attach a paper tag to them. I'm going to show you this piece as an example. This is a piece that I have attributed to Florenza. I'm going to zoom in and let you get a really good look at the design of this piece. Now I'm going to show you the back of the piece. As you can see, this piece is unsigned. I'm going to show you something on the web using my iPad. In the Google search bar, I've simply typed in Florenza Jewelry and I've clicked on Images. As you can see, this is a Florenza piece that looks very similar to mine. Here we have another one that was listed on Ruby Lane. I'm going to zoom in on that as best I can so you guys can see it. So there's that piece, and this is my piece. If you collect Florenza jewelry or if you've done any research on their pieces, you probably already know that many of their pieces were not signed. Florenza started out as a supplier that manufactured pieces and designed pieces to sell to wholesale outlets. They also made pieces for other jewelry designers. However, those pieces were not designed by Florenza. Florenza did not start signing their pieces until around 1949 or 1950. This is a photograph of my brooch beside a signed Florenza brooch. The two are so similarly made and look so much alike that I believe that I could attribute my piece as being a piece that was designed and made by Florenza. These bracelets are another very good example. You can see that they're identical. The only difference is the one in the middle is gold tone rather than silver tone. One of these bracelets is unsigned and the other two are signed, but they're signed by different companies. This first bracelet is the unsigned bracelet. I'm going to open it up and I'm going to let you get a really good look at the inside. Usually vintage bracelets like this will be signed on the tab or the closure. Sometimes the mark will be on the outside of the tab and sometimes on the inside. Another place that bracelets like this will often be marked will be on the inside of the hinge. As you can see, this bracelet is not signed. This bracelet was most likely produced by a manufacturing firm and then sold to a buyer to go to a department store. Once this piece arrived at the department store, it would have been packaged in the department store's packaging, or perhaps even had a paper tag with the price and the department store's name on it. This second bracelet, done in the gold tone, this bracelet is signed, and I'm going to show you where it's signed. As you can see, this bracelet is signed on the tab. This bracelet is signed Whiting and Davis. Again, this bracelet was probably made by a manufacturing company. These companies were often known as jobbers. They either made the bracelet with Whiting and Davis's mark on it, or they had a bunch of these made up already and went back and stamped them with the Whiting and Davis mark. Then we have the third silver tone bracelet. This bracelet is also signed, but it's signed for a different jewelry company. Rather than being signed on the tab, this bracelet is signed on the hinge. And this bracelet is signed Vargas. The Vargas Jewelry Company had a lot of bracelets like this that they sold. They also sold a lot of pieces that looked just like Whiting and Davis pieces. This is just a really good example. Often you will run across pieces of jewelry that are unmarked, and they'll look familiar to you. You might look at it and say, that looks like something, or that looks like a certain brand. You may be right. It could be an unmarked piece that is identical to a piece that was made for a jewelry company, such as Whiting and Davis or Vargas. I think this is important for collectors. As for me, I like to research. I like to know a little bit of the history behind my item. If you're a reseller, it's also something important to know about so that you can do a little bit of research. That way, if you're listing that item, you can give the buyer that information and say this item could be attributed to Whiting and Davis, or this item could be attributed to both Whiting and Davis and Vargas. Both companies had bracelets that were marketed identical to this one. If you've been a collector for a while, or if you're new to collecting, the more you look at certain pieces by certain jewelry companies or certain designers, you kind of start to get a feel for what their pieces look like. You start noticing similarities in their pieces when it comes to the design, the construction. It kind of helps train your mind and your eye, and it will make it easier for you to spot pieces. I'm also going to show you a book and a book piece that you guys might be interested in. This book is Unsigned Beauties of Costume Jewelry, Identification and Values. This is a great book if you are a collector or if you're interested in becoming a collector. This book is by Marcia Sparkles Brown. It shows a lot of unsigned beauties in this book, and it also gives you a lot of very good info. The prices that you see in this book, because it does give values, is going to be prices from 2005, so many of these pieces are going to be worth a lot more now. I happen to own a piece that's in this book, and I'm going to show it to you today. This is a piece that I own that's in the book. So I think this is a really great book for a collector to own. Most of the pieces that I've shown you today and talked about are pieces that were made in the United States. However, I wanted to take a few minutes to show you these pieces of jewelry. The pieces that you see here were not made in the United States, they were made in Western Germany. One thing I notice a lot about pieces that were made in Western Germany, many of them have that filigree look to them, or the filigree backing, and you can see that when I turn these pieces over. Many years ago, when I first started collecting jewelry, I was always on the hunt for Miriam Haskell jewelry. And as many of us know, she used a lot of filigree in her pieces. At the time, I was early to actually collecting pieces by designers and did not realize that a lot of different jewelry makers used filigree in their pieces. This orange colored necklace, once I turned it over and saw that it was stamped Germany, I still bought it because I loved the look of it. I believe that this necklace is from sometime between the 1920s and the 1930s. So I believe that this piece is Czech. Czech jewelry is something that I have just recently started putting time and effort into studying. I do have quite a few pieces of jewelry that I believe to be Czech, and I also have a piece that is signed Czechoslovakia. With pieces like this, I think it's really good to research them. They could be a little bit more valuable because if they could be attributed to the Niger brothers, Those pieces are very highly collectible and sought after. I have a channel that I'm going to recommend if you're interested in Czech jewelry. That is Killer Queen Vintage. Dana has a lot of knowledge, and she shares a lot of pieces of Czech jewelry. Usually on Thursday nights, she has what she calls jewelry school, and she also sells. I love watching her content. I usually don't get to watch it live, mainly because I'm usually working during those hours. But I'm going to put a link to her channel below. I hope you enjoyed this content today. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to share these items with me. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications on more content about collecting vintage and antique items. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.